I had professors my whole graduate degree that was like, we don't get into social work for the money. And it was like this, it's kind of like a big joke. But there are actually a lot of good opportunities that do pay very well in every field.
Hey, Matilda, welcome, and thank you today for talking with me about the career journey you've been on. So, I wanted to interview some of my past students that are about 5 years or so out from graduation that have landed some pretty cool job opportunities in hopes that we can find some pointers and tips and things that worked well for you, and maybe some things that didn't, or suggestions you might have for others. So, what year did you graduate college?
So I graduated, it should have been 2017, but I finished semester early. So 2016, December of 2016.
Okay, so you've had a little more than 5 years.
A little bit more, yep.
Oh, okay, that's fine. And your major was criminal justice with a minor in sociology.
Yep.
And so why don't you tell first a little bit about the current job you have, and then maybe even just how you got to that position.
Sure. So right now I'm in a contracted role with the Office of Public Defense for the state of Washington, and I'm a contracted social worker. I work directly with 1077 clients, which is NGRI, not guilty by reason of insanity.
Mm. Oh,
And
wow.
so I'm a part of their defense team. Myself and an attorney will be assigned to clients that are either at a Western State Hospital or Eastern State Hospital up here in Washington. And they have been obviously not convicted of a crime, but they are sent to these hospitals. And so recently, there was a big lawsuit against them for kind of holding on to these clients and not really working on getting them released into the community at all.
Mm.
So the Office of Public Defense got involved, and now I work directly in creating conditional release plans and unconditional release plans for these individuals. So I'll meet with them in the hospitals, do phone calls pretty frequently, and we work on kind of figuring out what they need to be successful in the community. And then put those big plans together and work with the attorneys, and we go to court, and I'll get to testify in court on them as well.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, hopefully reach an agreement with the state to allow these people to re-enter back into society appropriately. Some of them have spent like 30 years in there. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, so that's
What's
what I
the
do.
conditional versus unconditional release?
Yeah, so if they go on a conditional release, there's conditions they have to meet. So they still have to report to like Department of Corrections. They still work with people that are a part of the hospital. They get a transition team.
Mm.
So there's just, and then depending on their case, there's just certain conditions that they are required to follow.
Okay.
Usually after about like 6 months to a year, if they're doing really well in their conditional release, then we'll go for unconditional. And then at that point, none of us are involved anymore, and they get to,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
So do
members
you
of
stay
society.
involved with them if it's a conditional release? Like they'll still be meeting with their social worker and such?
Yeah, so I am with them until we're able to reach a full unconditional release.
Okay. So are you part of that transition team you talked about?
Yeah, so the hospital has their own as well. We're supposed to be working with the hospital, but there's also times where the hospital isn't in agreement for certain things, and so that's where we kind of come in and we'll petition. Um, and yeah, so sometimes I'll be a little bit more active with clients if the hospital's not deciding to do that.
Okay, that makes sense. So you were a criminal justice major, sociology minor. What grad school did you go to? Or
So
like
I
what kinds?
Yeah, well, so I started at UNLV for a clinical mental health program. And shortly after, well, about a year into that program, I realized clinical wasn't exactly the route I wanted to go. Um, and it was sort of like, I don't know it was sort of like a blessing in disguise. That program ended up losing their accreditation, and that kind of gave me that push to leave that program and pursue just like an MSW, a master's in social work.
Okay.
So I
I think I wrote you a
transitioned.
letter for that first one.
Yeah. And thank you, by the way.
Oh, you're welcome.
um,
8 years
and
later.
that one went, so then I ended up at University of Nevada, Reno, in their MSW program.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so how, a lot of students when they pick a major, some majors are very much connected to a career path, like if you're get your BA in, social work or a nursing degree. But most majors are not directly connected to a specific job or career path. How did you make that transition? Did you always know you wanted to be a social worker, even when you were a criminal justice major, or how did that?
Yeah, no, that was probably the pressures of leaving school or also even just being in school and not knowing. I went into SDSU thinking I was going to be an anesthesiologist. I started as a biology major and I quickly realized that just wasn't it for me. And with criminal justice, I had a lot of assumptions like, oh, you want to be like a police officer. And I'm like, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. And so I started going that route. And then I realized I wanted to be more in a social role, right? But it was I never really knew. I didn't know that social work was exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't think I'd ever end up as a social worker. And so being in school and kind of having to pick is really hard.
Yeah.
But having the opportunity to do a bunch of different classes and electives and stuff is something I always recommend because you kind of take one or two classes and you realize that that's something you enjoy and it comes natural to you.
Yeah.
So yeah, I had no idea what I was going to do. I think there was a lot of like panicking and pressure from society and family and friends and other people who really knew what they wanted to do. And so yeah, I just kind of explored around a little bit, but I stuck with that major because I enjoyed the classes. And yeah, and I ended up here. So
That's awesome. What were some of the roles you had? So like from, the last semester of your senior year till now, I'm sure there's been some jumping around, or was it a pretty straight path?
No, there was quite a bit of jumping around. So I lived in Las Vegas from right after San Diego. I moved there. And just to get working, I just started working in a restaurant right when I got there. And I was going to grad school at the time. And then I found I made connections like through my master's program. And there was a girl that I worked with or I went to school with, and she worked for a foster care agency. And they had a position open up there. And so I applied and I got that role. And that sort of started my career in like child welfare. So I've been in child welfare for, since then up until this past November when I started my new role. So I was in child welfare for quite a few years, but at the same time, I knew that that wasn't the ultimate goal. So I got other opportunities offered too that weren't paid. But I still would like make time. I got to be a court coordinator for juvenile diversion court. And that was like I realized like I do love like the justice system. I like the court system, but I also like that I'm able to be in a role where I can help provide like resources and things like that for individuals to do better. So that was a good experience.
Sorry, I was going to ask like because you're in a court environment now or for the defense department and you're a criminal justice major, so it sounded like you kind of always wanted to get back to something with criminal justice, or were you not sure and then did the degree help when you applied?
Yes. Yeah, it did. And I think like the role that I'm in now is just worked out really great because it has connected my criminal justice degree as well as my social work degree. And it's just kind of created this role that I feel like was made for me in that sense.
That you probably didn't know existed when you were in college.
Yeah, exactly. I had absolutely no idea. And I think that's the other thing too, right? It's like with social work, people think like a social worker in a hospital or child welfare or something like that, kind of like those typical roles that are usually associated with that title. But there's like so much more out there that I didn't know. So
yeah, it's like staying open to opportunity while also building towards some form of a path, right?
Yeah.
It seems like there's a challenge in between, I think some people have this idea that you need to know your passion and follow it with this laser focus. And then others, have all these curiosities and things they're interested in and not sure what to do. And I kind of feel like it's usually something in the middle, right? You try things and then you decide if you do or don't like it. I don't know, it sounded like you said you kind of had these ideas that you wanted to do social work, help people, you value the criminal justice system, but also I've heard you say you really didn't know what you wanted to do, and then you ended up in working at a restaurant.
Yeah.
What was so a lot of the students that are watching this are right at that stage where they're graduating and that's exciting, but then they're trying to find those first career jobs, and they might still have
Mhm.
college jobs or might have to just pay the bills with something like you did initially.
Yeah.
But what was, if you can remember back, how was that transition period of like trying to get into the first like full-time career job? Was it challenging? Was it a easy time of hiring? What?
Yeah, I would say like my first full-time career job, I'll probably use that as the state of Oregon for child welfare. And um, they were doing like a big hire. They were on like a big thing. So a lot of people did get hired at that time, which I felt really fortunate about. Um, but during that time, I sort of felt like it was okay to like establish myself in that role while still working towards other things. I think ultimately I knew that wasn't the exact like goal of mine. But I knew that even just because I'm in this role, I can still do really well and I can excel, and there are opportunities to grow in it, which I was somewhat open to. Um, but I also knew that there's also opportunities elsewhere that I can still work towards outside of that current role.
Yeah.
That answers your
So
question.
when you okay, so they were hiring. Oh, I feel like you touched on something I want to push or find out some more about. But
Mhm.
in terms of the job search for that first full-time job, like were you sending out tons of applications, or there was this big hire you said? Was that like the only place you applied? Like how was the actual search in that time frame?
Yeah, I have applied I have applied to a lot of different types of jobs.
Okay.
So I think I kind of pulled from really any experience that I had, and I was sending out applications to wherever I felt I would have a chance to
Yeah.
work. I felt like I really just needed to get my foot in the door. Um, and I was okay with that, and it ended up working out for me. Um, so yeah, I did. I applied to, I can't remember exactly what jobs there were, but there was multiple jobs. I mean, I worked in like restaurant, I worked in retail. I did all the things through like my grad school, just to kind of get by. When I didn't feel like I had enough experience, I had a lot of rejections, just based off of my experience or my resume. And that was really hard because I felt very qualified with my education, but that didn't fully do it.
Yeah.
So
So how'd you break through that? Like, was there a strategy in putting the resume together? Did you like, so if what I'm hearing is other than the degree, if it's like restaurant and retail, but you're trying to get into this specific career, and a lot of students struggle with this. Like, how do I get experience? If they want to hire me, and they will hire me if I don't have experience, sort of
yeah.
chicken and egg thing. Do you remember, was there any, like, were there some internships or a short experience or something to kind of make the resume look stronger? Or you mentioned a friend, was she instrumental?
Yeah, I had like making friends if people are going to grad school, building connections there is super helpful. There's oftentimes like professors that will have opportunities. And I think the way society is right now too is so much is focused on like money and pay. And that was something I had to ignore and realize that although my time is very valuable, like I need this experience like for my resume. Like, and I will say the leverage that those unpaid experiences had on me getting into the role that I am now is like, I mean, it's more than just like an education could show. So, you have things to speak on and experiences to speak on in your interviews. And especially now, like work, the force is so competitive. And so those things like really did matter ultimately. There was things from SDSU, like I did the prison tour that the criminal justice system off or the criminal justice program offered, and I got to go to like Folsom and San Quentin and Sacramento State and all these big prisons throughout California. And when I wanted to get into a criminal justice type role or a role that incorporated criminal justice, I got to talk about that experience. And that meant a lot more to these, like the hiring boards, than just saying like, oh yeah, I got my degree or I've been working in restaurants, right? So
Yeah,
just
exactly.
things like that.
I mean, to a degree, maybe it's a kind of branding. You're like, I am this working toward this field specifically. It's also cultural capital. You have some of the language to even rattle off the names of those prisons,
Mhm.
and the education alone may or may not always provide that.
Yeah.
Great points. Did you have any kind of like mentors along the way, or did whether that be from work or school or family, or did that not play a significant role?
Yeah, to be honest, it didn't. And I think it would have been really beneficial if I'd found someone to have been a mentor. I think it probably could have saved me some time. Ultimately, I'm happy where I've ended up, but I do think having a mentor or even just talking to someone that's in a similar position or somewhere where you could kind of see yourself being is really useful. I would talk to people from like I would, get in contact. I thought maybe, oh, I could go into like HR or something like that. And I'd reach out to someone and try and have a conversation there. And it always went well, but ultimately it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. So finding someone to be a mentor or just to talk things over with would have been really helpful. But unfortunately I didn't have someone like that for my career path.
Okay. Yeah, and that's certainly not most people don't. And I did a big survey of students, and
Yeah.
there's only like 1 in 5 can say
Yeah.
yes.
And I will say it's interesting because there's times where I did have conversations with people like when I thought I wanted to go to law school and I would talk to lawyers and there's a good amount of people who actually steer you away from certain professions that they're in that I found just
Mhm.
very interesting. Where sometimes the negative things are highlighted a little bit more than it being like an encouraging
Yeah,
conversation. So
I get
yeah.
it. When students tell me they want to get a PhD and become faculty, sometimes I'm like, let's really talk about what you're saying here. Because they just see you in class and think it looks, chill or something.
Yeah.
Um, So tell me a little bit about, it sounds like you've shifted, once you got that kind of first full-time career path, you've shifted roles a couple of times over the years, which is pretty important, I think, for that upward motion. And how do you think of like, when to stay, when to go? Like certainly you want to be growing, and if there's, different
Mhm.
places may or may not have as much of a growth opportunities, but especially in those early years, some of the literature shows that students who do make a couple of transitions in the first few years tend to end up their careers are stronger later on. Their pay
Mhm.
tends to be a little higher. How did you decide like how to navigate those, like when to stick it out a little longer, when to look for the next thing?
Yeah. Well, so with the state of Oregon, I got hired as a foster home like certifier. So I did home studies and I certified families to be foster homes. And I did that for 4 years. And I would say one thing that
Oh, your first role was 4 years.
yes, with the state of Oregon. So I did in Las Vegas, I did a short stint at that foster care agency before moving back. But I would say like my first, what I would consider like my career role, I did it for about 4 years there. Um, and I knew it was time to leave because I knew that there was a lot of potential. I started realizing I was into policy. I wanted to be a part of like molding how things are done. And um, I saw a lot of opportunities with the state.
Mm.
Um, and I applied and I applied and I applied. And I would apply for these roles that they were state level. So they were Salem, which is like the capital for Oregon, level roles. And I was denied like over and over and over again. And sometimes I would get to the final interview and it would just come down to like, oh, well, this person has been with the state for 20 years and you've been here for 4, or um, my master's degree I finished in 2022, so it had only been like a year. And so I felt like there was so much competition in that agency and I could not catch my break, but I knew that I had like so much more to offer, so much more potential. I will say like the state pay is not it's not great. And I was ready for something else. And so I began applying to a lot of different roles at that point, and I had been through maybe 16 different like interview processes with the state, and denied almost all of them. And then until I found this one role that I'm in now. So Yeah,
Wow.
there was
You had to
there was
relocate for that one, right?
yeah, yeah.
And so was that, I mean, did you have family where you relocated to, or did you just you move for the job?
Well, we were in the my fiance and I were in the process of buying a house,
Okay.
or looking to buy. And so, um, when I started looking into Washington area and saying that this was required to be in the state, we kind of started exploring over here. So it worked out good with timing, but
Oh, so you were able to do a job hunt from distance within the,
yeah,
okay, awesome.
yeah.
For those who might be interested in your kind of line of work, can you tell just a little bit about what a day-to-day the job looks like in terms of the kind of tasks and things you do, and then maybe a tip or two on like how they would prepare if they wanted to do social work in a kind of government criminal defense kind of arena.
Yeah. Um, well, one of the nice things about my current role is that I am contracted. So I am my own boss. I have my own business license. So my day to day is pretty controlled by me and
Okay.
like I don't have anyone that I'm reporting into or anything like that. But it does require a lot of self-discipline, with that being said.
Okay.
Um, my day to day is typically I do quite a bit of meetings with attorneys, and I do a lot of calls and visits with clients as well. So the one thing about this job is it is still technically like a case. You're kind of like a case manager. You have a large caseload of clients. They all have very different needs, and a lot of them want to talk on the phone all the time and things like that. So managing my time is very important. Making sure that I'm giving the same amount of effort to all of the clients that I have. But yeah, I'm typically either on calls with attorneys, attending trainings, going to court to testify, and then writing these reports. I also do a lot of research because this is sort of a building from ground up position. This is a new program, so
Okay.
uh, trying to maneuver the systems and see how we can make things work for all the clients is what I do a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, I'm curious about with the advent of AI, a lot of professions are being disrupted. Uh,
Mm.
to what degree? And I've heard that it's impacting the legal field significantly. I don't know about social work as much. Have you seen yet much sort of AI impact, or like, are there tools people are using, or that you need to learn, or have you, or has that not really been much of a concern yet?
It hasn't been a concern yet.
Okay.
And I haven't even thought about it until now. But no, it has not popped up in this role yet for me.
Okay. I was seeing a lot of like legal research areas, and where it was being, I guess ChatGPT has recently scored very high on both the LSAT and the bar exams.
Oh wow. Oh
Yeah.
wow.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm
that's
sure it'll come soon.
right. So, just a couple last questions here. Is there a moment when you felt like particularly proud or accomplished in your career?
Yeah, so actually one of the things that I keep referring back to was not even like it was this volunteer job working for the court in Las Vegas. And juvenile diversion court is a program, right? So for kids who are kind of going down the road of um, criminality, or doing things they shouldn't be doing and might end up in the system, they're given this opportunity to be redirected through like programs and resources. And so the juvenile diversion court in that county was not doing very well. They didn't have a very high success rate. And so when they brought me on, I had the opportunity to basically discontinue contracts with all these agencies that we were partnered with, um, and find new programs like through research and just building relationships in the community and things like that, um, and sort of rebuild this whole program, and create new resources and opportunities for these kids to finish diversion and graduate from the program. And the success rate just it went up. It went a lot better and a lot smoother for those families and the kids. And so I think that was
Mm,
probably one of my best moments.
yeah.
And I've kind of carried that with me into this role too. So
Awesome. Yeah,
yeah.
I've heard you in more than one of these roles talk about building new programs or changing systems, and then I also think I heard in there like a quantifiable metric, like the success rate went up. I
Mhm.
tell my students a lot that they should try to find quantifiable accomplishments to put on the resume.
Yeah.
Like maybe that that was an example of that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So
Cool. So how do you continue to grow in the field? Is it sort of structured into the position? Do you have to be studying, reading, taking continuing ed courses? What's the professional?
yeah, I still do a lot of like continuing education just for my MSW, but I'll say like personally, I used to struggle with asking questions. I would think that I was fearful of sounding stupid or not knowing or being educated enough in certain roles.
Mm,
And so at times I wouldn't ask the questions that needed to be asked, and that would only really cause anxiety for myself. And I wasn't able to perform the way that I should have been. And so for me, like continuing to develop professionally is understanding that you can still be like a professional in the field and not know everything. And there's always going to be people that know more than you. But there's also going to be people that don't know, and they'll come to you, and like that's when you'll get
yeah.
to kind of be the expert on things, and that's always a good feeling too. But for me, it's really just like the continuing education and
Okay.
asking the questions, and even if it feels silly, kind of
Yeah.
putting yourself out there.
Oh, I
Yeah.
like that. So there's sort of the structured side of the continuing ed, your degree requires, certification requires, and then that informal, just not being afraid to ask questions.
Mhm.
That's great.
Yeah.
So when I ask people about like why they pick or want to do certain career paths, even especially when they're still brainstorming, there's sometimes this tension between like passions, pay, or personality, or the kind of structure of the work or work-life balance. Like people have a lot of
Mhm.
different values. Do you have any either advice or kind of want to share your take on like what the importance is in the balance of some of these things, like following your dreams
Yeah.
or getting a stable paycheck?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something, even to this day, sometimes I kind of struggle with that, or I compare myself to others who are working corporate and making a lot of money. But I also, just the way that things have panned out, like I'm a true believer that if you are ultimately going for what you really want, like things are going to work out, and the money will come. Um, I had professors my whole graduate degree that was like, we don't get into social work for the money, and it was like this, it's kind of like a big joke. But there are actually a lot of good opportunities that do pay very well in every field, and you just have to kind of put your head down and work until you get there. So I'm a little bit more, I lean towards going with your passion and what you're comfortable with and
Mm,
what you want to do every day. Um, the work that I do can, and especially like in child welfare, was pretty emotionally draining at some parts of it, but for me, it was a lot more rewarding, and I am proud to tell people like about what I do and things
yeah,
like that. So,
very simple.
um, yeah, I say go with the passion and go with what you're good at, and
Okay.
yeah.
That's good. I've heard some folks say, don't go with your passion, go with your talent or go with your skill. And I'm
Mhm.
hearing you say both, but whatever your kind of passion is, if you want to, like in your case, make a difference in kids' lives initially and now people in the criminal justice system. But you did mention go with what you're good at. And so I think that's another important piece.
Yeah.
Sort of wrapping up, final question here. If you just had some advice for like a senior in college who's preparing for the job hunt, you can have more than one bit of advice if you can think of it, but what would you encourage them? Or if you could speak to your younger self, what might you say?
Yeah, I would say I would probably have encouraged myself to shoot a little bit higher in like job applying for jobs.
Okay.
Um, the worst that can happen is you don't get the job. So putting yourself out there. I would also say don't take any conversation or like words of wisdom for granted.
Mm,
Um, and also I would say those little volunteer or unpaid internships or anything like that, don't take those for granted either, because
mm,
those are really what like would shine through for in my experience when it came to interviewing, especially because it's hard, um, and landing the roles that I wanted. I
right,
would say that's really where those things came about. And in the moment I didn't think of it like that.
right.
Um,
That makes
yeah.
sense. But it just made me think like, did you have any kind of, how'd you prepare for the interviews?
Oh man, that was something that I really wish I had taken like a course on, or something that I wish was taught more or touched on more, especially now that things are getting like a lot more competitive. Um, Interviewing is really hard, and knowing the right things to say and how much to talk or how little to talk
Mhm.
is hard. So for me, I always research like the agency or the company I'm applying for and make sure I fully understand kind of what their goals are, and then understand how I would fit into that company.
Mhm.
Um, and I did a lot of interview prep. That was something that made me a little uncomfortable, but there are interview prep courses that you can do. And honestly, until this role came up, I didn't do any of those. I thought that I should be able to get it based on just having a conversation and my knowledge on things, and that didn't work out for me. So, doing some type of interview prep, I would recommend, because there's a lot of useful tips and things out there that don't just come up on Google. So.
Sure. Excellent. Well, I don't want to take too much of your time, so I think we'll stop there. But I thank you so much for sharing your insights, and I think you do very important work for sure. And I just appreciate all of the suggestions and tips that you had to share.
Yeah, no problem.